I have this article here. I should have pulled up another one too, just to get a little more information, and maybe that's something we can do. But I have this article here from Mashable that says TCL enters smartphone territory with its very own lineup of devices. So this is something that we have been hearing for, I think, the past couple weeks, maybe longer than that. That TCL was ready to. I think there was an article on The Verge about that. That TCL was about to unveil some new phones. And if you guys don't know, TCL, they you know, I think they make a good amount of TVs, and I think they've also made smartphone devices, just not under their name, or at least they've had a hand in creating devices for other manufacturers. But now they want to stand out. They want to kind of have their own thing. And let's see if any of these actually hold some water, right? Or if it would be worth your money, worth your dollar. So let's see here. TCL has finally taken the wraps off its first series of company branded smartphones: TCL 10 5G, TCL 10L, and TCL 10 Pro. So three different versions, which is what a lot of manufacturers are doing these days, kind of making a very high end version, a mid range version, and then a budget version. But I think the difference here is that the prices here are substantially lower than what you would typically find in other smartphone manufacturers. So while all three phones offer some powerful features, they're all priced under $500. So that's a big selling point for them. Is the price being so low? Because when you think of three phones that are in the same series, in the same lineup, you'd always imagine that you're going to have one that's at a super high end price, and to know that the top version is under $500, um, that doesn't sound bad at all. So under $500 is my price point for me, tops. And actually, I'm kind of curious to see if this top end version would be worth my $500. At $449, the TCL 10 Pro is the most expensive of the bunch, and comes in Ember Gray or Mist Green, both of which have a matte finish. Actually, this green looks pretty nice. Those look pretty good. Originally unveiled back in January, again, like we've read, TCL finally announced the full specifications of its 10 series phones: TCL 10L, so that's their bottom line, 10 Pro, and 10 5G. Well, they're so weirdly named. So is TCL 10L their low end? Okay, we know TCL 10 Pro is their high end. Um, TCL 10 Pro, only one with an AMOLED screen. Okay, that's good to know. So the only one with an AMOLED screen, a 6.47-inch panel with 1080p plus resolution, supports HDR10, Netflix certified display. For regular content, there's an NXT Vision chip that does real-time SDR to HDR tone mapping. The display has curved sides and a teardrop notch for the 24 megapixel selfie camera. Here's that teardrop notch right here. There's also an in-display fingerprint reader. Again, my question here is, how well is that in-display fingerprint reader? Is it going to be something like what we've seen on the Galaxy S10 or the Galaxy S20, where the sensor is kind of hard to pinpoint? It's not as fast. That has yet to be seen. The quad setup on the rear boasts a 64 megapixel main camera. Next up is a 16 megapixel ultra wide camera. So a main shooter, an ultra wide. This is followed by a 5 megapixel low light camera, quote, low light camera, which is unique to the Pro. I wonder how well that works. The main camera can record 4K video at 30 frames per second. The phone's powered by a Snapdragon 675 chipset, like we've talked about, 6 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of storage. Plus, it has a micro SD card for up to 256 gigs more. And it has a 4,500 milliamp hour battery that supports 18-watt quick charge. So those are pretty good specs for a $450 phone. Again, I say pretty good. I can't tell you much about the Snapdragon 675, how well it works, but maybe I'll have to do some digging and see what other phones carry that Snapdragon 7 or 675 chipset. So the TCL 10 Pro will come out in Q2 of this year and will cost $450 US. It'll run Android 10 out the box. So it has TCL customizations on top, which I've said this before. I'm not the biggest fan of other skins, but stock Android. Call me a purist, but that's what I am. Other than OnePlus just tweaking it here and there, it's hard for me to deal with other software on top of Android. Not really my thing. If it's your thing, that's cool. I'm just saying it's not mine. So the TCL 10 5G goes up to a Snapdragon 765G chipset. And that's probably why it has a 765, because the 675 probably does not support 5G. Besides the 5G connectivity, this also means a faster CPU and GPU. So that's weird. Is the TCL 10 5G their mid-range model? So this has a faster CPU and GPU, but it's not their Pro model. This is very confusing for me now. It also has 6 gigs of RAM, 128 gigs of storage, and a micro SD. Micro SD expandable storage, like a storage slot. I'm sorry. It also has the same 4,500 milliamp hour battery and 18-watt charging. So this model borrows the 64 megapixel main sensor of the Pro, but drops down to an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera. So they're saying their ultra wide doesn't get as high resolution. Is that right? So 16 megapixel ultra wide versus this one has an 8. So it doesn't, again, just because it has more megapixels doesn't mean it's better, but maybe it isn't the better sensor. Again, a lot of this has to be seen. I really don't know. It gets a 5 megapixel macro cam instead of the night cam. That's weird that they have all these different configurations, all these different models. I didn't really think that they were going to be swapping different cameras into the different models here. So a 2 megapixel depth sensor to bring the number up to 4. Another change is that there is now a fingerprint reader on the back. So these are really, really different configurations, different chipsets, different cameras, and even the fingerprint sensor. So the Pro version has an in-display. This one has a rear fingerprint sensor, but it has a better chipset and it has worse cameras is what I'm getting out of this. That is a very confusing lineup. This is because the front is different and uses a 6.53-inch LCD with a punch hole and 16 megapixel selfie camera. That's right. They're also using different displays. This panel also has 1080p plus resolution with a 19.5 by 9 aspect ratio, HDR10 support too. The TCL 10L has the same front as the 5G, a 6.53-inch LCD with a 16 megapixel camera, selfie camera, and a punch hole. The back is pretty similar too, including the rear mounted fingerprint reader and 8 megapixel ultra wide cam. The main camera, however, gets a 48 megapixel sensor. Also, the macro camera now has only 2 megapixel resolution. So we're talking about the lower end one here too. Despite the different sensor and chipset, the phone can still record 4K video at 30 frames per second. Speaking of chipset, this model uses a Snapdragon 665 with 6 gigs of RAM. There are 2 options for the storage, 64 and 128. Okay, so again, this is their lower end model, 4,000 milliamp hour battery, no fast charging, and then this is the one that's going out for $250. All 3 have this SDR to HDR tone mapping. They also have 3.5 millimeter headphone jacks, which is great, and something TCL calls, quote, super Bluetooth, the ability to connect to 4 wireless speakers simultaneously. Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at these comments here. The 5G one is far better than a Nokia 8.3 5G in terms of design. So yeah, the design looks pretty good. I'm really feeling that green one there. This comment also really is kind of hitting home for me right now. They ruined the 10 Pro with that 675 chipset. Um, Again, I don't know much about that chipset, if it's worthy of that price or not. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of curious to see how these come out, if their price is worth it, um, and if it's worth your $300, $400, $500.